What if I told you that you could get into law school without taking the LSAT? No logical reasoning, no reading comp, no test day nerves, just apply. Sounds like a dream, right? Well, that dream just got one step closer to reality. The American Bar Association, the gatekeepers of law school accreditation in the US, has voted to let law schools apply for permission to go test optional. That means, yes, a school could theoretically admit you without an LSAT score. But before you get too excited, I want you to pause, because the truth is, this is not the death of the LSAT. It's the beginning of a slow, confusing, high-stakes shift in how legal education works. And if you don't understand the nuances, you could end up making a mistake that costs you tens of thousands of dollars in scholarship money or keeps you out of the school you really want. So today, I'm going to walk you through what the new rule actually says, why they're doing this now, how schools are likely to respond, and what you should do to take advantage of the chaos. So let's zoom in on the fine print, because this is where most people get tripped up. Here's what the ABA actually did. They passed a rule that lets law schools apply for what's called a variance. A variance is just a fancy term for special permission. It's like asking for an exception to the normal rules. In this case, the American Bar Association is saying, if you're a law school and you want to try admitting students without using a standardized test, go ahead and apply. We'll look at your case and decide if you can do it. If approved, that school can admit students without any test score, but only for a limited time. We're talking here 3 to 5 years max. Then they have to either reapply for that variance again, or they go back to the old rules. And there are a few more things you need to know. First, this is not automatic. Law schools don't get to go test optional just because they want to. They have to apply for permission. They've got to prove they have a plan in place for this and show that their process for admissions will still be fair, transparent, and tied to student success. Secondly, not all schools are going to qualify. The ABA is not just going to rubber stamp every request. Schools have got to explain how they'll still maintain academic standards, how they'll support students without LSAT data, and how they'll track outcomes like bar passage rates. This also is not a permanent change. The ABA has made it clear that this is just a trial run. Think of it like a pilot program. If it goes well, they might consider expanding it in the future, but for now, it's limited and experimental. And remember, the LSAT is still fully allowed for use in admissions, and it's still the default. Nothing in this change bans law schools from using the LSAT. Nothing says that schools cannot use it. In fact, the overwhelming majority of law schools are still building their admissions decisions around it. So here's what that means for you. All these news headlines saying ABA drops LSAT requirement are wildly misleading without this context. It's not like they flipped a switch. They are not tossing the LSAT in the trash overnight. What's really happening is this. The ABA is opening the door just a crack to see what happens. They want to explore alternatives and give schools some room to innovate, but they're doing it carefully, slowly, and under supervision. That means this is not a revolution. It is a controlled experiment. And any smart applicant should be thinking, how do I play this to my advantage? And we'll get into that in a minute, but first, let's talk about why the ABA is doing this at all and what it reveals about the future of legal education. On the surface, this might look pretty straightforward. The ABA wants to make law school look more accessible. But when you dig deeper, you'll realize this is about way more than just helping students. The first big reason is pressure to improve access and diversity. This is the public reason the ABA gives, and it is a real one. There is a growing push across higher education to remove barriers that disproportionately affect students from underrepresented backgrounds, and the LSAT has been a target for a long time. Critics say it favors students who have time to prep, can afford expensive tutoring or prep courses, and already know how to take standardized tests. And if we're being honest, they're not wrong about that. Just like with the SAT or the GRE, the LSAT tends to reflect access to resources, not just raw potential. It's not a perfect test, and no test is. So the ABA is saying, let's at least give schools the option to try something different. Their hope is that test optional admissions might open doors to more students who've been historically shut out, especially first-gen college students, students of color, and students from lower income families. The second big reason is that law schools are nervous about enrollment trends. And almost nobody's talking about this, but law schools are certainly aware enrollment is under pressure. The number of people applying to law school will start to dip again with the coming demographic cliff. And there was a big spike during the pandemic, a big spike in the recent presidential election cycle, but application numbers will trend back down. And if that keeps going, which it will, law schools will face a real problem. Fewer applicants means lower tuition revenue, which means major financial stress for these institutions. So what do you do if you are a lower ranked or mid-tier school and your applicant pool is shrinking? You look for ways to widen the funnel. That is where test optional comes in. It lets schools say yes to students they might have otherwise rejected for having a low LSAT score, and it gives them a bigger pool to choose from and potentially more tuition dollars. That's not cynical, that's just business. Law schools need students to survive, and this rule change gives them a tool to do just that. And the third big reason is that other professional programs have started offering test optional admissions too. This is not happening in a vacuum, and the ABA is feeling the pressure. They don't want to be seen as being stuck in the past. So this variance rule is partly just about keeping up with the times. They're saying, we're open to change and willing to test new ideas, we are paying attention. It's also a way for them to buy time, to run a trial, collect data, and figure out whether going test optional is actually better for both students and schools. The fourth big reason is that the LSAT's influence is complicated. It's both respected, but it's also resented. It's respected because it does offer a standardized way to compare students, especially when GPAs vary wildly across schools and majors. But it's also resented because it's high stakes, stressful, and for many students, it's completely unfamiliar. There's no content overlap with your college classes, and you don't learn logical reasoning as your major, of course. And so because of that, the LSAT is seen by some as a villain in the law school admissions process. A lot of students blame it for holding them back, even when the real issue might just be a lack of access to strategic prep. And the ABA knows all of this, and this new rule gives them a way to say, we hear you and we're doing something. But remember, the goal here is not to kill the LSAT. It's to test what happens without it. This is about options, not overhauling everything. And that's why, despite all the headlines and the hot takes, the smartest move right now is to stay calm, stay focused, and to make decisions based on data, not all the drama. Now let's get brutally honest for a second. Just because the ABA says schools can apply to go test optional, that doesn't mean most of them will. In fact, I'd bet money that the vast majority of law schools will stick with the LSAT, especially in the short term. Why? Because law school admissions is not just about admitting students. It's about rankings, bar passage rates, and institutional reputation. And the LSAT is at the center of all three. At the top tier schools, aka the T14, there is no way they are ditching the LSAT for the vast majority of applicants. I'm talking here Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Columbia, Chicago. These schools are the brand names of legal education. They have global reputations to protect. They live and die by their US News rankings, no matter how much they might pretend not to care. And those rankings still factor in LSAT scores as a major component. If a school stops requiring the LSAT, their average score could drop. And if that happens, their rankings drop. And if their rankings drop, they lose prestige. They lose top applicants. They risk everything they've built their brand on. These schools are not about to gamble with that. Even if they agree the LSAT has its flaws, they still see it as a valuable filter. It lets them compare applicants from totally different academic backgrounds, from all over the country, using the same yardstick. So don't expect the top 14 or even the top 30 to go test optional anytime soon. If anything, they're going to double down and push even harder for elite LSAT scorers. Even if the ABA banned use of the LSAT tomorrow, I guarantee you these schools would invent their own internal test to replicate it. Now you might be thinking, okay, that's fine for the T14, but what about the schools that are lower ranked? Wouldn't they want to go test optional so they could admit more students and collect more tuition? The short answer is not so fast. Because here's the problem. These schools are under intense pressure from the ABA to maintain high bar passage rates. If too many of their grads fail the bar exam, they risk losing their accreditation. That's not just embarrassing, it is an existential threat to their very existence. Without ABA accreditation, students can't take the bar. They can't practice law, and the school basically becomes worthless. So these schools need some kind of predictive tool. And right now, the LSAT's the best one they've got. It's far from perfect, but it gives them data. It lets them filter out applicants who, statistically, are unlikely to make it through 3 years of law school and pass the bar. If they go test optional and admit students who aren't prepared, even if those students look great on paper, they're gambling with their entire institution. So most of these schools will keep using the LSAT. They might explore alternatives, but they're not going to take big risks. The stakes are just too high. Now, what about the mid-ranked schools, say in the 50 to 100 range? They're in a tough spot, and that's where things get interesting. They're not elite enough to coast on brand name, and they're not desperate enough to take huge risks, but they are looking for an edge. These are the schools that might say, let's try it. Let's apply for the variance. Let's go test optional for 10% of next year's class and see what happens. They might start with students who have strong GPAs from rigorous schools, students with unique life experiences or backgrounds, and students applying to part-time or evening programs. They'll gather data, track performance, and compare outcomes. And if the numbers look good, they might expand the policy slowly. But even then, don't expect a full pivot away from the LSAT. More likely, these schools will use a hybrid model, LSAT optional for some applicants and required or at least preferred for most. The LSAT, of course, will still be tied heavily to scholarships and merit aid because of the rankings. In other words, these schools are going to hedge their bets because they have to. So bottom line, top schools will keep the LSAT because of rankings, lower ranked schools will keep it because of bar passage risk, and mid-tier schools might experiment, but cautiously. So even though the ABA opened the door, very few schools are going to sprint through that door. Most will stand at the threshold, look around, and wait to see who makes the first move and whether it backfires on them. Which brings us back to you. If you're applying to law school in the next couple of years, betting on the LSAT disappearing is a risky move. Because while the rules might be changing in theory, the reality is that nothing major is changing yet. And the smartest thing you can do is prepare as if nothing is changing at all. So let's not dance around it. Yes, you should still take the LSAT, even with the ABA's new rule, even if a handful of schools go test optional, and even if you hate standardized tests, because the LSAT is not just a test, it is a lever, a powerful one. And if you know how to use it, it can change your entire admissions strategy. The biggest reason is that the LSAT is still required or preferred by the vast majority of law schools. Test optional is a trend, but right now, it's just a trend, an experiment. The overwhelming majority of law schools still require an LSAT score, and even those that don't require it usually prefer one. Why? Because the LSAT gives them something concrete, something standardized, something they can plug into their internal formulas to make decisions faster and more confidently. And so let's say you didn't submit an LSAT score. What would happen? They'd look harder at everything else. Your GPA, your personal statement, your letters of rec, your resume, and your background and your life story. Now ask yourself, are you ready for that kind of scrutiny? Because if you don't give them a hard number in your LSAT score to anchor their evaluation, you're asking them to bet on you based entirely on subjective materials. That's going to be a tough sell, unless you've got a 4.0 from a top school, a Pulitzer-level personal statement, or glowing letters from federal judges who know you well. The LSAT, as much as you might hate it, takes off a lot of that pressure. It objectively shows you can handle the mental demands of law school even if the rest of your application has some weak spots. The second big reason is the LSAT is your one big opportunity to stand out because your GPA is baked in. If you're a senior in college or you've already graduated, you're not going to go back and redo college. That 3.4 or 3.0 or 2.8 GPA, it's done. But the LSAT is still in your control. You can study. You can take it multiple times. You can retake it and improve. It's one of the very few parts of your application that's still in play, and it can dramatically shift your chances. Think about this. If your GPA puts you in the 25th percentile, but your LSAT puts you in the 90th percentile, what do you think happens? You've just upped your odds, and now you are a risk worth taking. You become interesting. You are a potential upside, someone who could outperform expectations, and law schools love those stories. The third big reason is that a high LSAT score is key to getting merit scholarship aid. And that's what most students overlook, and it could be a 6-figure mistake. The LSAT is not just about getting in. It's about getting paid. At most law schools, merit-based scholarships are heavily tied to your LSAT score. Yes, of course, your GPA matters, your essays matter, but nothing is going to move the needle like a strong LSAT. Here is a real example. One of my students had a 3.2 GPA, not so great, but she worked her butt off and got a 173. That one number, her LSAT score, got her into a top 20 law school with a 75% tuition scholarship. That is over $120,000 in savings, all because she decided not to skip the LSAT. Of course, your results may vary. Every student's application cycle is going to be different, but the bottom line is this is the kind of outcome that is possible when you pursue the LSAT, especially to offset a lower GPA. You don't want to wait for test optional. You don't want to try to write your way in with your essays. You grab the lever you can control and you pull it hard. Now, the fourth big reason is the LSAT signals that you are a serious applicant. And whether schools say it or not, there is an unspoken signal that comes with submitting a competitive LSAT score. It tells them that you are serious about law school. You're not just applying on a whim. You didn't just stumble into law school because you didn't know what else to do. You are committed, you prepped, you planned, and you followed through. It shows them you are someone who is likely to stick it out, graduate, and pass the bar, not someone who's going to drop out after 1L when reality sets in. And in a competitive cycle, that signal makes a difference. So let's zoom out for a minute. I know the LSAT is stressful, it's time consuming, a lot of it is not fun, but it's also the most powerful tool you have left in your application. Your GPA is done, your resume is mostly set, and your life story is what it is. But the LSAT, that is the wild card. That's the one place you can flip the script and go from overlooked to overqualified. So yes, even in the world of test optional policies and ABA variances, the smart move is still the same. Take the LSAT, crush it, and use it to your advantage. Because if you do it right, this one score can pay you back for the next 10, 20 years and beyond. So let's get into what really matters, your next move. You've learned that law schools can go test optional, but most of them won't. And even the ones that might are moving slowly and carefully. So if you're applying to law school this year, or anytime in the next 2-3 years, here's exactly what to do. First, you want to assume the LSAT still matters, because it does. Yes, the ABA made a rule change, but no, it does not mean you can skip the LSAT. And even if some schools stop requiring it, most of the competitive ones still will. And the schools that don't will still prefer a strong LSAT score. So don't try to game the system. Don't try to guess which schools might go test optional. Don't build your law school dreams on a maybe. Because while everyone else is wasting time debating what the ABA rule might mean, you could be studying, prepping, and improving your score. The LSAT is the one part of your application where effort is going to pay off big time, so don't ignore that. Secondly, treat the uncertainty as your advantage. Right now, the entire admissions system is in flux. Some people will panic. Others are going to freeze. Some are going to wait to see what happens. But you're not going to do any of that. You're going to use this moment to stand out. You're going to take control of the one variable that is still under your influence, the LSAT, and you're going to crush it. Because while other applicants hedge and hesitate, you're going to become the most obvious, undeniable choice in the pile. That is how you win. The third step is to build a real prep plan, not just hope. Because if you're serious about law school, don't just study when you can. That's like saying, I'll figure out how to swim once I jump in the ocean. The next thing you're going to do is build a real prep plan, not just hope for the best. Because if you're serious about law school, don't just study when you can. You want to have a daily LSAT study schedule, a mix of untimed drills, timed sections, and full-length exams. A clear review process so you learn from every mistake. You want to have a feedback loop from a tutor, a coach, or a smart study buddy to help you figure out your blind spots, and you want to have a timeline that matches your target test date and law school deadlines. If you don't have that yet, build it today. And if you'd like my help, you can check out the links below to find out more and to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. Because the students who walk into test day confident aren't the ones who tried hard, they're the ones who followed a system. And you want to remember what's at stake here, because this isn't just about whether you have to take a test. It's about where you go to law school, how much debt you take on, what kind of job you get after graduation, and whether you get to choose your own future or settle for what's left. And the LSAT touches every one of those decisions. If you score high, you expand your options. More schools, more scholarships, more negotiating power. But if you score low, your chances shrink, your debt increases, and you might get in somewhere, but it might not be where you want to go. So don't treat this like just another hoop to jump through. Treat it like the high leverage investment it is, because a few months of focused prep now can literally save you 6 figures in law school tuition. So you want to own the decision to play the long game here. What separates the winners from everybody else is that the winners are willing to do the work, even when it's hard, even when it's unclear, and even when others are looking for shortcuts. If you want to be a lawyer, that's great. That means navigating complex, uncertain systems. It means thinking strategically under pressure. It means staying calm when others aren't. And this is your first test. Not the LSAT itself, but how you respond to a changing, unpredictable system like the law school admissions process. And here's the good news. If you choose to focus on what you can control, you'll come out ahead no matter how the rules evolve. So commit now, make a plan, follow the plan, and you will watch your options explode.